Okay then, time for my first ever silent review, and well, what a one I've chosen to start on. And well, yeah, that's about it. There's no witty way to introduce this one because it's pretty self-explanatory, so yeah, let's do it. That movie nut here with a review for The Passion of Joan of Arc, the 1928 silent film starring Maria Falconetti, Eugène Silvain, André, Berley, and Maurice Schutz. The film is a dramatization of the trial of French saint and icon Joan of Arc, a young girl who helped France win several victories during the 100 Years' War, dictated by the will of God. Now imprisoned by the English and on trial for heresy by a group of clergymen, Joan fights to justify and defend both her faith and her unique gift. However, the clergy are determined to break her at any cost, using every tactic from interrogation to deception and even potential torture, but Joan's will hangs tight till her inevitable demise at the stake. The cast here are excellent, though of course there is a major as well obvious difference here from most other films that I review. Being a silent film, we obviously can't hear them, so everything has to be carried by expression and body language, giving it a much more theatrical feel. Leading the charge is Maria Falconetti as Joan, who captures just how out of her depth and terrified Joan is in this situation, often with a distraught look on her face, while still giving the role a sense of dignity and commitment, much like Joan's is to her faith. The supporting cast is made up for the most part of the various clergy and guards, most of whom are of older age, and combine this with the black and white, and this gives their faces, their wrinkled, pockmarked faces, an almost demonic feel, as if they've become almost living gargoyles, enraged and irate to Joan's determination to stand her ground. And this only further enhances just how isolated and helpless she is in this situation, and just how high the odds are stacked against her. On a technical level, Carl Dreyer, the film's director, goes for an unorthodox approach for the time. If you've seen any silent films or just glanced at photos or pictures of them, they often have the camera pulled far back, more akin to almost recording a stage show in a sense. However, Dreyer goes up close and personal, often utilizing close-ups and extreme close-ups to give this claustrophobic feel, and combined with some very sharp lighting and the lack of makeup on the actors, it creates a genuinely uncomfortable and tense atmosphere. And as for musically, the film has never had an official soundtrack since there was never records that Dreyer had a preference, so of course there exist many versions. The one I'm basing this review on is the Criterion version, which uses Richard Einhorn's oratorio, Voices of Light, a haunting choral piece that complements the religious themes and imagery perfectly, and adds a surreal dimension to Dreyer's uncomfortable visuals, turning the film into a sensory experience that envelops you utterly in just how unsettling it all is. While there may be a couple of times that it comes dangerously close to overwhelming the imagery, it still feels completely and utterly fitting, and never completely took me out of the viewing experience. But now comes the script, and given the type of film this is, it will be both a little tricky but also interesting to discuss. Naturally, with no spoken dialogue, most of the narrative has to be conveyed by the actors and a couple of title cards here and there just to keep a general track of conversations and time. However, don't be fooled by what may sound this incredibly archaic. It's actually very effective. The reason being is actually quite simple. It's a very emotional story, both in terms of reaction as well as presentation. There is an almost beautiful directness that perfectly lets us in on how our characters, mainly Joan, feel and think as the trial goes on. Simple nods of the head or movement of the eyes tell us what oftentimes dialogue can't, or if it tries, it's not very effective. Furthermore, it allows us to inhabit Joan's skin and feel what she feels. This is especially poignant when the camera is not on her, and because of the near-constant close-ups, you almost feel like you're the one on trial, surrounded by all these angry men. It really cranks up the tension and unease as you watch it, which frankly is really impressive for a film this old. What's more, despite the presence of religion, it's not that mystical or fantastical. Rather, the film is quite grounded and is more about belief and how it can be wielded. Joan's belief in her divinity, the clergy's belief in her heresy, the belief Joan instills in others who may or may not betray her as the story goes on. Regardless if God is real or not, it's the fact that Joan's faith is so incredibly strong that she ultimately is willing to die for it that is the core of the story. This is enhanced by the fact that she isn't some kind of superwoman. Joan does get frightened and even at one point comes close to completely breaking down when the pressure gets to her, allowing us to see the human being behind this great myth and legend. Now, of course, it's not all peaches and cream. As I mentioned before, this particular version's musical score can be a little overpowering at times. But even watching a different version, there are still some little irritances. The clergy, though effectively intimidating, are not much more than one-dimensional villains, and little is made of the richness that is the debate of which side truly knows more about Christianity and questions of faith, though you can just write it off as simply being constricted by the time the film was made in. And, well, the film can also be a little rambling and slow in its pacing, even for the time, in part due to Dreyer being very deliberate with how long he holds some close-ups, especially on Joan. It gets the emotion across, but sometimes it holds a little longer than needed to make its point, and considering how often it happens, it does wear a little, though never enough to wreck what is a rather well-aged film. To cap off, I give Passion a silver star. Probably one of the more emotionally engaging and complex silent films available, it's worth at least one viewing for both aficionados of this era, as well as newcomers to film history. It's shot and acted beautifully, and it grabs you in more ways than you would think for a film as old as this one.